He sat there with his mother on the left and his girlfriend on the right. They were both proud of him. This should be a great day for him. Jacob was so proud, but when his name was mentioned, the director stood dead. He stared at Jacob for a moment and then continued on the list. When they found out why Jacob was selected for his degree, there was much to be said. In Crown Point, Indiana, a student attended Crown Point High School. His name was Jacob Dalton Stanley, and he had dreams of serving his country since he could walk. He wanted to be a surgeon. At 10, he was so certain that this would be his dream. He wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, but nobody took him seriously at such a young age. Jacob was careful not to mess things up, so he studied hard and made sure to finish high school before he could start his big dreams. He graduated from college and applied for a Marine position immediately after graduating. He did the boot camp it needed and managed to return to Indiana so he could attend his graduation day. But he had no idea how it would turn out. Both Jacob's friend Shannon and his mother, Kathy, beamed with pride when they saw him walk back up the steps to the house. He was wearing his Marine Corps uniform, and his mother almost wept at the sight. She knew that her son was tough. He was about to graduate. She couldn't have been happier. The three of them headed to the high school graduation ceremony. They were so happy with what Jacob had achieved. All of the hard work worked in his favor. Jacob was just as excited as his mother and girlfriend. He would beam with pride when he received his diploma in front of his friends and family. He felt like he had worked so hard in school for so long that he deserved it. All of Jacob's friends and teachers smiled at him. They were happy to see him again, and some of them even greeted him. The air was electrifying with the excitement of all the students. What would turn the excitement into surprise was what Jacob wanted to wear. For some reason, it seemed to be pushing things in a different direction. Headmaster Chip Pettit was the headmaster of Crown Point High School. He went on stage and picked up the microphone. He looked down at his scribbled notes and began the first lines of his speech. After a short speech, he called out the names of the graduates in alphabetical order. But soon everyone would hear, and they would all be in shock. The headmaster finally reached the S's. The anticipation killed Jacob. He couldn't wait. Kathy looked over at Jacob and smiled. He even written an acceptance speech that he'd practiced until the words were all but memorized. His name was next. He jumped up and hardly waited to be called. But then there was a pause. The director's eyes were on Jacob's. He got a grin on his face and then looked back at his list. Then he read the name after Jacob. This was an outrage. He had purposely skipped his name. Jacob couldn't believe it. Why should he do that? Maybe his name wasn't on the list. Some kind of mix-up. He didn't understand. Jacob hung his head. He thought back to defying the headmaster that day, but he thought he was professional and wouldn't try to humiliate him in revenge. He felt perfectly reasonable. He had stood up for what he thought was right. It was just that the headmaster didn't see it that way. Why was his clothing such a problem? He didn't think it was fair. After risking his life to serve his country, was he treated like this? And what made Kathy most angry was that she looked around and noticed that there were other students who also violated the dress code for graduation. And yet their names were still mentioned. Did Mr. Pettit have a problem with your son? It was a shame, Kathy later said in an interview. There was one student who wore shorts and sneakers and another student who wore a red turban that symbolized his religious beliefs. Jacob had appeared for the ceremony in his blue Marine Corps uniform in full clothing. But to be fair, the Crown Point Community School Corps, nothing aimed at whether U.S. military uniforms could be worn upon graduation. Everyone was outraged, but nobody expected Jacob's story to reach such high places. The situation was absolutely ridiculous, said Leon Tustison, a peer of Jacob. He's in the military and he's risking his life for us. It is unacceptable that he was not allowed to take the stage. The students were outraged, she added. There were some students who wanted to go in solidarity with Jake, and the game didn't stop there. Crystal Hernandez, who heard the story, told Facebook, "I'm amazed that in the course of your life people always tell you that you are proud to be different, celebrate your uniqueness, and yet at one of the most memorable events in your life and life, an administrator makes the decision to completely destroy your accomplishments," she wrote. Shame on you, CPHS and Shijapi Pettit. But Mr. Pettit had more to deal with than the anger of the church. Soon the House Education Committee heard the story too. "I sent a letter to Mr. Pettit today," wrote one angry Facebook user. "I know people who get all of the financial support from CPHS and their programs. If that were my son, I would have accompanied him across the stage." But what did Mr. Pettit have to say? Well, according to him, Jacob had been warned. When Jacob attended his final rehearsal at Crown Point High School that day, Mr. Pettit had informed him that he was not allowed to wear his uniform to the ceremony. And to Jacob's shock, the director was true to his word. When he came to graduation in his uniform, his name was removed from the program. But as Mr. Pettit regretted after an incredible amount of backlash, despite receiving a lot of hate online, Mr. Pettit insists that he was just enforcing school policies and standing by what he did. He argued that Jacob could have worn a military stole or cord over a dress instead and was recognized during the graduation ceremony. This tradition is not meant to be disrespectful to students, parents, or our community, but rather to be a source of pride for our students, Pettit told NBC Chicago. But no defense would make him less of a hypocrite in the public eye. To make the injury worse, another school in the Crown Point area, Hobart High School, had a similar situation that was also widespread, but had also enrolled in the Marine Corps, and like Jacob, had graduated early so she could enroll, and she was allowed to wear her military uniform during the opening ceremonies. When Anna returned to her graduation ceremony, she expressed her desire to wear her military uniform to the school administrators, and in sharp contrast to Jacob's story, she said she got her full support. "You are absolutely amazing. It's okay with the Marines that we wear our uniforms for high school," Anna said. "I know the school board, the headmaster, and the superintendent have spoken about it, and they have agreed that I can wear my naval uniform." Couldn't Principal Pettit stick his tongue out and do the same? Unlike Crown Point and their now hugely unpopular headmistress, Peggy Buffington, superintendent of Hobart High School, said their school is trying to recognize military graduates. "We recognize the audience and the future military of our graduates by the fact that they are standing. It's always a very special and patriotic moment when the audience roars with applause," explained Peggy. This year was especially nice because Anna Kritos graduated in the medium term and landed on time for the graduation ceremony. "We already recognized her and the success she's had with the Marines," Peggy continued. "She is a private specialist in first-class military professions. She is currently serving in her intelligence specialist class in Virginia and began her education in January. We are very proud of their achievements. However, the military is not concerned with the dress code for graduation ceremonies, according to a U.S. Marine Corps spokesman. The Marine Corps does not dictate which specific high schools can or cannot graduate," said Major Clark Carpenter of the Marine Corps. "That decision rests with the school management. But it can't be up to the school principals for long." Rep. Mike Aylesworth was appalled to read that Jacob had been banned from his own degree, and he agreed to all of the setbacks the school received. He even added some of his own. "I didn't think what happened was appropriate," said Mike, a Vietnam-era veteran. "I just think that people willing to put themselves in danger should be able to wear a uniform when graduation," and his comment gained more than support. Rep. Mike Aylesworth received committee approval for a bill requiring school districts to allow students who are already serving in the military to wear their uniforms in place of traditional graduation gowns. "It's a mess from local school boards across the state," said Mike. "I just wanted to make it uniform across the state. Most school companies in the state are doing the right thing and don't need a law for guidance, but there are obviously a few school companies that need help," Mike said, obviously referring to Mr. Pettit and Crown Point High School. "We should encourage young people who want to risk their lives for our country to graduate and go on stage in their uniform," added Mike. Wheeler Stanley, Jacob's father, refused to comment on the incident at the school, but said he would support legislation to enforce a uniform standard across the country. "I would wholeheartedly support it," he said. "But what does Jacob say?" "I don't want the social media controversy to divert attention from the 2017 class," he said in an interview. "I don't want to make any additional statements and get all this over with so I can start my career in the Marine Corps."